Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath. To some, it might seem somewhat strange that on a Thursday morning we're here talking about the Shabbat. But the word makes it very clear that the day of unleavened bread, the day after Passover, is indeed an annual Sabbath. And those who are in covenant with Yah, they will keep the Shabbat. So again, I say Shabbat Shalom. This morning, we want to look at the subject, the voice of his blood. The voice of his blood. And as I look at that subject, I realize even more so than before that Passover is characterized by blood. When the lamb was slain and the blood had to be placed over the lintel of those tents in Israel. And then the angel of death passed that night at midnight. And those who were in the house and had their tents daubed with the blood, they were spared. And there is a lesson in that for us that ought not to be forgotten. The blood. And there is a kind of double entree to this, because as I look on that side of the blood, and I see the blood there speaks of redemption, I look at the increase of the military expenditure of the world. And I see there it has increased significantly for the first time now over $2 trillion. The US, $750 billion. China, $237 billion. Saudi Arabia, $6 to $7 billion. India, $64 billion. And the UK, over $61 billion. They are all increasing their military budget, and the word says they're doing it to shed blood. So this morning on this day of unleavened bread, we're looking at this double entree, where on the one side of the world, they're building their missiles and warheads to shed blood. But today we come to look at the shedding of blood for the remission of sins. And so we're going to juxtapose these elements today and look at it through the word of Yah as our periscope. Because in the word it says, the voice of his blood. And it gives the impression here that the blood has a voice. The blood speaks. And when the blood speaks, the blood is heard by the Father. The blood is intelligent. The blood cries out. And I'm thinking that if the blood cries out from the ground, we're going to be looking at Cain, or the anglicized version is Cain, in a few minutes. But when I think of Cain, I think of the slaves in America, many of which were whipped with the slave masters whipped, some of which were dragged behind pickup trucks, some were lynched, and some were hanged on trees. And I wonder to myself, and perhaps you are doing the same thing, their blood, surely it must cry out, even as the blood of Cain cries out from the ground. Surely Cain was just one man, and his blood was heard, and the voices of the slaves in America, in Brazil, in Britain. Am I to assume that there is no sound to their voice, and the hearing of the Creator is not hearing them? Surely they're crying out, and they have cried out. So this morning, we want to look at the voice of his blood and hear what the blood is saying to us this morning. So turn with me to the book of Bereshit. And we're going to be looking at chapter 4. And the word says, and Adam knew Hawa. Hawa is Eve, anglicized. So, and Adam knew Hawa, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have gained a man from Yahweh. And again she gave birth to the brother Abel. Again, that's not Abel, it's Abel. And so we anglicized it and we call it Abel. And Abel became a keeper of the sheep, but Cain became a tiller of the ground. This text is rich. And I believe that the foremost of all hindrances that stop us from getting truth is the presumption that we already have the truth. Sometimes we come with preconceived notions, ideas taught to us previously by institutions, and we bring them into the arena of study, and we presume that we already know the truth, and so we are only reading what we already know. And I see that as the foremost of all the hindrances that stops us from having truth. So this morning, we want to examine the word as we are called to do. Come, let's reason with me, Yah says in Isaiah 1 in verse 18, and we have come. We have heeded the call to come and worship, and therefore Bereshit 4 is speaking to us, and we want to know how lazy, how indolent might our ears be this morning, because the word says, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying. What is the Spirit saying this morning? So let's look at chapter 4. Let us dissect and analyze. And sometimes, when people analyze, you get the paralysis of analysis, in that you are spoiled for choice. There's so many things you don't know what to take out of it. The word here says that Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. Now, as you look at those two verses, I wonder what you see. And this is not a thought I want to oversell, but I just want you to see it and see whether you see what I think I might be seeing. Because it says that she conceived and she bore Cain, and she said, I gained a man from Yah. So, because she understood Genesis 3:15. She understood that prophecy that a man, the seed of the woman, was promised, and she now in her mind is thinking, this is he. But we'll go back there. And then verse 2, listen to verse 2. And again she gave birth to his brother. We call him Abel. And Abel became a keeper of sheep, but Cain became a tiller of soil. Notice here, we have two boys. And usually in the scriptures, when we talk about birth, he says, and she conceived and she gives birth. And again, she conceives and she gives birth. Here, we have one conception and we have two boys. So we could, by inference, conclude that Cain and Abel were twins. One conception, but two boys. Verse 3, and it came to be in the course of time that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to Yahweh, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of the fat. And Yahweh looked to Abel and his offering. Now, there's something significant here, that the offering that Abel brought, it says he brought it with the fat. And that ought to drag your mind, because when you start to study the Levitical era, you see that the fat was very significant when they give their offering. And so Abel here is following something that was established long before the Levitical era. There was a principle laid down even from that time of Cain and Abel. So it seemed here that the Passover is really not a new thing. In Exodus, it was just implemented there as the Ten Commandments were implemented then, but they existed way before. He brought the fat, but his brother brought fruit, because there were different kinds of farmers. And scholars have speculated, they have reasoned variously, and some have said that the reason that Cain's offering was not accepted was because he had not brought a sacrifice in the way that Abel had. He did not bring an animal, but there were different types of farmers. One was a tiller of the ground, and you know, he took his father's vocation, because when Adam sinned, you remember, Adam was told to go and till the soil. And we're told here that, or so it seems, that Cain is the older of the two. He's the older of the two. So he can claim to some extent primogeniture, which is the firstborn. He can claim that. and therefore they brought their offerings. Now it says the firstling, and that could be that it was a kind of a tithe. In that regard, it would only be a thank offering rather than a sin offering. But, where the scripture is silent, we don't want to be noisy. So we leave it at that. They brought their offering, and it says, Yah looked upon one favorably, but not to the other. Not at all. And in so doing, the word says, Cain became irascible. He became angry. He had that tendency, like some of us, to easily get angry. We bring that mood swing, that anger, that bitterness with us. And the whole point of Passover, is to get rid of those old ideas that we brought from Egypt. And so the question is begging to be asked of each of us this morning is that anger that you had last year, that mood swing that you had, that bitterness that you had, that dislike that you had for that person, the inability to love as you need to love, what did you do with it? Cain? Because as we grow, we are expected to put aside those things that offend our journey and hinder the path in which we're traveling. What did we do with it? Are you a better person this year than you were last year? How significant is it that the blood is on the lintel of your heart? How does that manifest itself outwardly? It has always been an outward stretch, but it's an inward reach. Where are you in terms of where you should be? As I speak about Cain, I speak about my own self. I ask myself the same questions. The word says, Cain became angry. And I wonder when Yah sees us in a state of anger and bitterness and moody, what question he poses for us, if not the same question. Let's read on. The word here said in verse 5, but he did not look to Cain and his offering, and Cain was very wroth, and his face fell. And so, remember, I am looking at the voice of his blood. And I want to know if you really understand the voice of his blood. And what is his voice saying to you? Do you speak the language of blood? Because the world's language is that they will destroy people, destroy innocent blood. Are you with me? So when we look at blood in the context of the world, we see death. But the word says the life of the flesh is in the blood. The words speak of blood as life, but the words speak of blood as death. So we juxtapose that, and we see the distinction that exists between the world's conception of blood and the word's conception of blood. One is life and one is death. And so we must ask ourselves also, when you bring your offering, whether it be tithes or otherwise, to Yah, how do you know that your offering is accepted? We are not now living in a time when fire would come down and consume that offering, and thereby we would know distinctly that Yah accepted. We saw that with Samson's mother, when the angel came down and the offering was consumed. We see that with Gideon. So we know these. We saw it with Abraham. And the point I'm making, and a serious point, is that some people may even pay double tithe, and if the life is not right, then they are doing no better than Cain did. Was Cain a believer? You bet he was. He was bringing an offering, so he was a believer. But his offering was not accepted because his life was not right. And when spoken about his life, he became irascible. He became angry. And so I'm asking, what did you hear the voice of blood say to you? What did you hear? And Yah said to Cain, why are you wroth? Why? And why is your face fallen? Your countenance, Cain, that's not how I made you. Why do you look that way this morning when you are supposed to look differently, Cain? Why? Why is your face falling? As something, Yah is asking this as if he doesn't know, but it's for Cain's benefit. Why are you looking that way, Cain? Why? Why? And it shows you that even when we bring an offering, and more so when we bring ourselves as living sacrifices, we must come not only with the offering, but with the right attitude, because motives count. Yah looks at our motives. And so it's not so much how much you give, because he says, I desire what kind of giver? A cheerful giver. But Cain was not in that state. If you do well, Cain, is there not acceptance? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at your door, and its desire is for you, but you should master it. I mean, clearly, Yah is giving Cain a time to repent. Cain, if you do well, do as well as your brother, it will be accepted. Are you with me? And listen to Cain now, because there are people, when you speak with them and you talk to them and you point out their attitude that is keeping them out of the way of the kingdom, they get angry like Cain. This is the king of all the earth here speaking to Cain. And he's saying to Cain, Cain, if you do well, if you go back and look at your mistakes and correct them and come again with a different kind of offering, attitudinally, you will be accepted. What did Cain do? The word said that Cain what? told Abel, his brother, "Come, let us go into the field." And it came to be, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. Wow. Domestic violence for the first time enters the family. Cain killed his brother. And let's go back to that scene. Let's visit the scene, because this is the first time that Adam and Eve are going to see death. They've never seen it before. They saw the leaves now dropping off the trees because of sin, the consequence of sin. And now they see that the breath of a human being is now gone from him. What consternation! What anguish! What pain! What wonderment! Pensive thoughts that may have been expressed at such a time. The family have never before seen death, and now their very own, he whom Eve thought was that Messiah sent to her, is now dead. At the ends of her brother. Think of that. The wages of sin is what? Death. But the gift of Yah is eternal life. That's what we're led to know in the scriptures. Come, let's go into the field. How was Abel to not know that his brother was going to do this? He saw his face just like Yeshua saw his face. And you know, there are certain people you just don't want to be in the same environment with. You don't go places with them because you don't know what they're likely to do to you. So you stay away from them, Abel. Are you with me? And so he killed his brother. But who did he kill? Who did he kill? As I said before, there are hindrances that sometimes stop us from seeing what we need to see in the Word of Yah, only because we presume that we already know the truth. And in that way, we deny ourselves the truth and do violence to our own spirituality. So the question comes back. Who did Cain really kill? We know that Abel is his biological brother. We know that. They're from the same womb. And we assume, based on what we read earlier, that they're twins. We assume that. As I indicated, I'm not overselling that, but it's a thought. We can draw inference from that by the fact that she had one conception and she had two sons. Well, turn with me. Let's identify who Cain really killed. Come with me to Lucas. That's Luke, Dr. Luke, the physician. And we're going to look at chapter 11. And we're going to start reading at verse 49. And because of this wisdom of Elohim, said, I shall send them Nebim, or prophets, and emissaries, and some of them they shall kill and persecute. So the blood of all the Nebim, the prophets, which was shed from the foundation of the world, shall be required of this generation. You didn't hear me. Yah says, the blood, we're talking about blood, the voice of the blood that speaks, the voice of the blood, all the blood of the prophets of this generation, it is required. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zachariah, who perished between the altar and the Mishkan. Yes, I say to you, it shall be required of this generation. What is Luke telling us? Or what is Yeshua saying? Yeshua says Abel was a prophet. Cain killed the prophet. Because Yeshua said, all the prophets, and he named them, he says from Abel to Zacharias. So it wasn't just a brother that he killed a prophet, the first prophet. Wow. And you can now understand why he's in dialogue with the creator of this first prophet. Yes? So verse 10 says, and he said, what have you done? Wow. What have you done? The voice of your brother blood cries out to me from the ground. Wow. And as I earlier stated, that if this one voice of Cain speaks so eloquently in the hearing of Yah, I must stop to ask myself the combined voices of the slaves that were whipped and thrown overboard in the Atlantic, traveling from Africa to the Americas and to Britain. What is the sound of their collective voices? What must it be saying to the Creator? And if Cain is going to suffer as a consequence of what he did to his brother, how much more, I ask myself, must the slave masters and those who benefited from it took the innocent blood of these bronze people? How much more do they cry out? This morning, what have you done, Cain? And now, your curse from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. If you will till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer in the earth. Did you hear me? Where did the blood cry out? What's the domicile? Where is the location that the blood cries out from? The word tells us that in Genesis 3, we are told when Adam sinned, what happened? The earth was cursed. Are you with me? And it would bring forth what? Thorns and thistles. That's what the word says. And so the blood here this morning cries out from beneath the bush, the thorns and the what? the thistles. That's where it cries out from. And so because Hebel is a prophet and his voice is crying out from the thorn, it's telling us because his voice is sending forth like waves. Because we know that some years later, a voice would cry out from the crown of thorns that they put on his head, the voice, his voice. And so we must go now to the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews, and we will look at Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. And let's look at verse 22, reading on. And it says, but you have drawn near to Mount Zion. Are you with me? And to the city of the living Elohim. That's where we're journeying, right? To Jerusalem of the Shemayim, that's the heavens, to myriads of messengers, to the entire gathering and assembly of the firstborn, having been enrolled in the Shemayim, and to Elohim, the judge of all, and to the spirits of righteous, then made perfect. That's where we're going. And to Yeshua, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling, which speaks better than Hebel. The word says the blood of Yeshua speaks better, more eloquent, superlative speech, more erudite. His blood speaks better than that of Abel. It cries out. So when I said our topic is blood, I'm not just speaking about Abel, but Abel being a prophet, when he prophesied, his blood speaks, and the great prophet Yeshua hears his voice, but his voice now speaks more eloquently than Abel. The voice of his blood. Oh, yes. And we also learn that when Adam sinned, Yah placed a cherubim to guard the entrance to the Garden of Gethsemane. The King James uses the term cherubims. But we know that cherubim is a plural word. We don't need to add the S. And you wonder why. Why did he stop the entrance? In fact, the word is saying, yeah, dwell there. Cherubim. We encounter about 5 cherubims in the Bible. In Isaiah's time, and then Yeshua himself, not Yeshua, but Satan himself was a cherub, a covering cherub. And the point is, you really don't need a cherub to deal with this. But Yah put a cherub there with a flaming sword. And I wondered to myself, is this the word that he put there to guard him? And you will see why I say that. Because he said he put it there to guard the way. Are you with me? And so there is no surprise when you read in the New Testament. You better come with me in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 9 and verse 2, and it says, and desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogues, that if he found any of the way. Hear me. whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Notice when this movement started with the apostles, it was called the way. Well, what is it that I'm saying? I'm saying our journey is to the tree of life. Hear me? But now that Adam has sinned, the way to the tree of life is blocked so that no disobedient person can get there. And so the apostles and the disciples, they knew where they were going. They were going by the way to the tree of life. They traveled by that way. Obedience. Come with me again to Acts 16, verse 17. The same followed Paul and us and cried, saying, these men are the servants of the Most High, which shew us the way of salvation. They know the way of salvation. Our way of salvation is to the tree of life. But it was blocked by a cherubim. Why? Because men were trying to get there by way of what? Disobedience. Well, what do you mean? Well, take, for example, you remember when Adam sinned. Adam sinned, and then what did he do? He tried to cover himself by way of fig leaves. That's religion. Religion is always trying to cover itself. And then Yah came down and killed an animal and used the skin to cover him, his nakedness. Telling you at that point, even here in Genesis chapter 3, that man could only be covered by the blood of an innocent person. That's what Passover is all about. But Passover started here in Genesis chapter 3, and Yah is saying, I told you the end from the beginning. What he's saying here, I told you the end from Genesis. I told you the end from Bereshit. It's here in Genesis. If only we could see that. But Laodicea is blind. So Laodicea is not going to see that. So Adam was locked out. And come with me again to Acts chapter 18. Acts chapter 18, and we'll read from verse 25 to 26. This man was instructed in the way. My question is, are you instructed in the way? The way of what? The way of Yah. And being fervent in the spirit, he spake and taught diligently the things of Yah, knowing only the baptism of John, and he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them and expounded unto him the way of Yah more perfectly. The way. So it was the way. The movement that is now called Christianity was not called Christianity. Christianity is a nickname. It's called the way. Why is it called the way? Because they understood that man is on his way to the tree of life. He has already eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but he knows he needs to go to the tree of life, but it was blocked. And so Yah instituted a system by way of the Levitical order, how to get there, to get to the way. But man is still trying to get to the way by way of disobedience, but he's blocked. And so you better come with me to Revelation chapter 22. Revelation chapter 22. And we're going to read, and he showed me, this is John speaking, having had his vision on Mount, that Patmos, that island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. John, who knows Yeshua quite well, John said, and he showed me a river of water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of Yahweh and of the Lamb. In the middle of the street and on the other side of the river was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nation. Are you with me? Yah says, I'm going to block the way with the cherubim for the disobedient children. But I will make that same tree available to the obedient at the end of time. He hasn't taken away his gift from us. It's still there. Are you with me? But it requires something for you to get there. Because there is no remission of sin except there be a shedding of blood. Hebrews 9:22. Because the life of the flesh is in the blood. So just think that you need to take a different view of blood. Blood speaks. Blood can be heard. Blood has a language. And that language is the language that Yah speaks. Are you with me? And so the word in Hebrews 12 said, Yeshua's blood speaks better, more intelligible, more articulate than that of Abel. So what is the blood speaking to you? We know what the language of blood is in the world. It's war, killing of innocent people. We go to Ukraine. We go to Africa. We go to other parts of the world. We see that blood means death, but the word says blood means life. Life. And so, what are we seeing? That Cain, let's go back to chapter 4 of Genesis. The word says that when Cain tills the ground, it will bear thorns and thistles. It is from that ground that the blood cries out this morning to Yah. Thorns and thistles. And even the creation, Romans, Paul says, groans. It groans. Are you with me? Not only does blood have a language, but the earth speaks a language. Wow. Why? Because of sin. And say, let's go to Bereshit chapter 22. We're now dealing with Father Abraham, who was told to take his son Yishtak, that's Isaac, and to offer him as a sacrifice. And the word says Abraham got up the next morning without murmur and was on his way. Listen to me. The word says Abraham took his son and he took servants with him. But while Abraham is going there, where is Abraham looking? He says Abraham was looking for a city that is not made with hands. And that's where you find the tree of life in this new city. Abraham's mind was cast somewhere else. The things of this world for Abraham had become strangely dim, even though he was on his way to offer his son as a sacrifice. And verse 7 of the same chapter 22 says, and Yishtak spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, see the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Where, Dad? Where is the lamb? That question was never answered until John 1:29. John, for the first time, seeing Yeshua, said, there is the Lamb of Yah cometh. He who was slain from when? From the foundation of the earth. Are you with me? That's the Lamb. That's the blood that speaks loudly, candidly, clearly, perspicuously to us this morning, the voice of his blood. Let's read on. And Abraham said, my son, Elohim provides for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, and the two of them went together. And they came to a place where Elohim had commanded him, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Yishtak, his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the messenger of Yahweh called to him from the Shamayim and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the boy, nor touch him, for now I know that you revere him. Now I know. Yahweh might say to us this morning, when everybody else is at work, and at play and at school, you are here heeding my call to keep the feast of unleavened bread. No, I know that you respect me. Might he be saying that this morning? Seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked and saw behind him a ram caught in the bush. Caught in the what? The thickest. That's exactly where what? The blood speaks, in the bush where the curse is. Abel's blood spoke from the thicket. But because he's a prophet, he's speaking to another prophet several hundred years down the road who would come and would speak more eloquently to us. We call him Yeshua. Why do we call him Yeshua? The angel says that his name, and his father named him. Are you with me? And so that's what we're dealing with this morning. And so there are some who say, well, we don't do this because it's done away with. You mean redemption is done away with, or atonement is done away with? So your sins have been atoned, right? And you don't keep the Passover. Yeshua himself said, I'm not going to eat this Passover with you because I will eat it when? In the kingdom made new. That's what he said in Luke chapter 22. And you said it's done. And so, may I ask you to consider Paschal wager. Who is Pascal? Blaise Pascal, is a French mathematician, is a philosopher, or was a philosopher, physicist, and even a theologian, Blaise Pascal. And he reasoned that any rational mind, any reasonable person should behave as if Yah exists. Some say he doesn't exist. But he's saying a rational person should behave, should act as if he exists. However marginal the probability is, you must act as if he does exist. Because in the end analysis, if he exists at the end of time, you find out that he did exist, and all the things that he asked you to do that you did not do, how will you answer to him? Pascal goes on. If you say he doesn't exist, and so you act irrationally like these military leaders, killing innocent blood when blood was to be atoned for, at the end of time, when you find out that he exists, you're in trouble. And if he doesn't exist, living righteously would have been the right way to live anyhow. That's what Pascal wants you to know. So the question is, can you afford to wager your soul? Can you? What have you done, Cain? What have you done? What have you done? You have killed a prophet, and the blood of all the prophets are required of this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah. You didn't hear me. America, the blood of all the people, the slaves that cry out in the shores of the Pacific, in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, in Brazil, in Liverpool, in Bristol. What do they say this morning on the day of unleavened bread? They have been liberated and they have been atoned by the blood of Yeshua that speaks more eloquently than the blood of Abel. And many among us that have been lost were in themselves prophets. Great men, but they were taken from their homeland and whipped with cat-o'-nines. Some were hanged, lynched, crucified. Remember, it was the Persians who invented crucifixion.